I'm doing a full in-depth breakdown. I don't know how long this video is going to take, but I'm going to go through it all of how I think about rewiring habits and your identity using personal systems so that you're no longer relying primarily on motivation or discipline, which comes in cycles, but we're actually using systems to be able to repeatedly create a consistent result in our life with consistency on the right actions and becoming the type of person we want to, the type of person that naturally generates the outcomes that we desire in our life. And yeah, rewiring our habits to instill good habits and remove bad habits to eventually change the course of our life, because at a fundamental level, habits quite literally shape your entire life. I have a saying that goes, show me your habits and I can show you your future, pretty much to a T, right? You really can't. They say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I think that the apple doesn't fall far from your habits. That was a bad joke, but you get the point. There's a quote I live by from Naval Ravikant, and he says, live in a way in which you're successful in whatever pursuit that may be. Live in a way in which you're successful in 999 parallel universes out of 1,000. Don't live in a way in which you get lucky in 50 of those universes, right? And what that means is you can realistically think of a way in which if you live this way, you're probably going to be successful in whatever pursuit you want to be in 999 parallel universes out of 1,000. What that means is it comes down to your habits, right? What you do on a daily basis. If I saw how someone lived their life every single day and the habits that they instilled, you could pretty much say, okay, yeah, I think you're going to end up here, right? And likewise for the reverse, right? And so that's the quote that I really keep in mind. Robin Sharma also says that genius has far less to do with your genetics and far more to do with your habits. So, without further ado, let's get into it. It's going to be one of the better chunks of time that you spend on your life. I'm basically just going to be dropping so much sauce, so much free game, so much knowledge in this video. Whatever comes to mind and whatever I think is genuinely going to be incredibly helpful for you to then rewire your habits and rewire your identity for the long run so that your life fundamentally changes. That's what I'm going to be talking about in this video. So I'm an open book today, and we're getting after it. And before I get into the full breakdown of the system that I use to rewire habits, I can tell you a little bit about myself, why I do what I do, how I got here, and who I am in a relative sense. So, like most kids, like anyone, I grew up wanting a specific life, right? My vision for a life that I wanted to create and eventually live was one of financial freedom, genuine fulfillment, the ability to do what I want when I wanted, and yeah, working on a job that I was passionate about, just the typical things. And I was taught that that was an unreliable future to bet on, right? That just wasn't, I grew up in a typical Asian household, and that wasn't what my parents understood, right? It was go get a job or go to college, go get good grades in school, get into the best school you can get, and then go recruit into, finance, doctor, lawyer, whatever, corporate job that was stable, right? And so, I grew up, and that was the first time where I kind of learned subconsciously to tolerate a misalignment between what I genuinely wanted for myself, right? The type of person I wanted to be, the type of life I wanted, what I genuinely wanted, and then what my daily action reflected, and just kind of having a gap, right? That was the first time I subconsciously learned that, sometimes you just have to tolerate that gap, or it's okay to tolerate that gap. And so I lived most of my life, relatively average, kind of at that level where average physique, pessimistic mindset, negative self-talk, at some points depressed, and just going through difficult times, but thinking that was totally normal, and not really putting any emphasis on living up to my potential and my highest standard in any regard. That just wasn't even a part of what crossed my mind. But as I started to get older, I was always a really philosophical person. I got really interested in Eastern wisdom and Stoicism and just spirituality. And as I got older, I started thinking about life more. And what really set into me was, I have an Instagram video that went pretty viral talking about this. But it was just my philosophy on life, right? And as I got older, I reached a certain point where I just stopped tolerating that misalignment because it started to not make logical sense to me. Not to live at your potential and not to kind of at least try to create and achieve the life that you wanted, right? Because we have one, for all we know, we're born, then we die. We have one shot, one slot at this existence as a human being on this beautiful planet Earth. That's all we know, and for sure. And so it just started to not make sense to me. It's like, why would I go my entire life, 80, 100 years, out of infinity, out of eternity, whatever, and play small? Like, and at least not try. I came to the point where I told myself I'd be totally fine if I gave it my best, but I failed. And then I pivoted, and I obviously did what you have to do to make a living, to just be a functioning member of society, whatever, right? But I got to the point where it just made no logical sense for me not to try, not to give my best. And so, yeah, that's what I did, I think, at that point, early days in college. And so that really got me thinking, okay, well, I'm really going to go for it. How do I get there? What is the way that you can reliably get to that place? And so I obviously dove into books. I obsessed listening to podcasts, all these great authors, thinkers, humans, just people I looked up to that had the type of life that I wanted, that, controlled their time, their location, finances, had a truly wealthy life, right? Not just success-wise, but internally, right? And I can talk a lot about how your life can be successful on paper, but your internal state can tell a different story, because I've been there with a 2-year concussion, having, quote unquote, like doing fine in school, having great friends, great experiences, studying abroad. But if you don't have your health, if you don't feel good, you really don't have anything. And that's what I saw, that can be a complete disconnect between what your life looks like on paper and the actual real internal scorecard. And so anyways, I obsessed over just this whole area of personal development, success, creating inner peace, all that, right? Just the good stuff in life. And the idea that really stuck out to me and really caught my attention was the idea that the door to success swings inward, right? That external reality reflects back to you your internal state. The outer is a reflection of the inner. If you will change, everything will change for you. That was the mindset, that was the shift that really just stuck out to me, and I just ran with it. And I learned this from a lot of people say this, right? A lot of great, successful, fulfilled individuals say this, that you got to work on you and then the rest unfolds, right? You can't earn, you can't live, you can't enjoy, you can't have any more than you are, right? And so I took that and I ran with it, and I obsessed. I saw that, okay, well, the most reliable way to influence my future was to just obsess over becoming the healthiest, clearest, most fulfilled, most productive, most peaceful, most enthusiastic, most skilled, most dedicated, whatever, right? Just becoming the best me. I saw that as, okay, that's how you actually get to a place, because you can pretty much say that who someone is at a fundamental level really dictates what they achieve, right? So who you become is what affects what you achieve. It's not the other way around. It's not you achieve something and then you become someone, because we know a lot of people that have achieved amazing things, but internally they still feel a sense of lack. And so the idea that I just trusted was that if I worked on myself, if I became the best person that I could be, and if I upgraded my skill set and my earning capacity and just, became a well-rounded, intentional human, that my external reality would then reflect that, right? And at least that's what matters, is who I became, because that's what sticks with you. So, long story short, I'm just going to be talking today, but long story short, that's the idea that I ran with. And there's a big transformative catalyst in my life when 3 years ago I went cliff jumping with my friends, and I ended up getting a concussion that didn't seem like a big deal at all at the time, but it ended up lasting for 2 years. So that was a difficult period, and if you don't know what that entails, it's basically waking up with brain fog, fatigue, not really feeling like yourself, headaches, pain, and worry, because a brain injury is kind of scary since there's no physical or tangible thing. It's relatively subjective, and also it's your brain. You don't really want to play with that. So anyways, that was a transformative period of my life, because you can't really do much if you don't heal properly with a concussion. And so I had no choice but to just obsess over optimizing my physical health. And I talk a lot about this, but one of the fundamental laws of human behavior is that the meaning that you assign or associate to a situation or a thing is what quite literally controls your life, right? You can think about this both in an internal peace standpoint, where it's like, an event happens that's out of your control, and then the meaning you assign to it will affect your internal state, sure. But for me, the concussion was incredibly powerful for rewiring my habits, because it completely altered the meaning I assigned to doing things that were good for me. For example, to instilling good habits and removing bad habits. So basically, I was never an incredibly unhealthy person, diet-wise, but I was nowhere near as committed to upholding standards and as thorough as I am now. And it's because during my concussion, that 2-year period where I just had no choice but to heal, right? That's obviously the only thing I'm focused on. The meaning that I assigned to eating unhealthy foods, sugar, fried foods, refined carbohydrates, the meaning I literally assigned to consuming those foods was pain, immediate pain, fatigue, worse health outcomes, and just feeling frustrated with myself, because I would then wake up the next day and be like, wow, why did I eat that? Because I know that what I want to do is heal, right? So that was the whole mental process. That was the meaning I assigned to eating unhealthy foods. And the meaning I assigned to eating healthy foods was mental clarity, energy, and self-love at a baseline, right? I'm doing the things that I need to do to be where I want, right? And that was the new meaning I assigned to eating healthy foods. And so you can imagine that I ate extremely well, because if you take those two meanings, there's absolutely, and I told people, I'm not even disciplined, right? I just don't even want that. I don't even want to eat unhealthy foods, because the meaning it has to me is just pain, immense pain. And the meaning healthy food has to me is immense joy and immense gratitude that I actually can eat healthy foods. And so, obviously it was a 2-year period. Those were the meanings that I assigned to it. And so after the concussion, that obviously stayed with me. And that's the way I still see something in my eye. That's the way that I still see eating healthily. Same went for exercise. I was pretty active growing up, but when I got to college, whatever, I wasn't super consistent, average physique. And because I saw the gym or lifting weights, shaping your body, I saw that as just, I kind of saw it as a means to an end, or a temporary thing where, eventually maybe I would get into a physique I wanted, or just do it to, maintain general health. But obviously with that, if that's my meaning, then it doesn't really breed consistency. And during my concussion, I associated getting my heart rate up, getting blood pumping. I associated just the benefits, the brain benefits and the heart benefits, whatever, the benefits of exercising on a daily basis as healing, right? That was the new meaning I associated with it. And so you can imagine that, and I associated skipping exercise with lower amounts of healing, aka pain, right? Pain that would last longer. And so you can imagine that I exercised every single day, because that meaning was so important to me during that period. And that changed so many different things in my life, but what I want you to understand is the meaning you associate to a specific situation or a specific thing is what quite literally controls your life. A client of mine had the similar realization with something as simple as a to-do list. He started to see the to-do list, an intentional daily to-do list that you write out every single day. It was no longer something he had to do for his work or career. It was every single thing on that to-do list became an opportunity to become the type of person that he wanted to be. That was the new meaning that he assigned to it. And he told me something as simple as filling out a W-2 tax form was totally transformed into a more empowering and a more intrinsically motivating task, because he now saw it, I'm not filling out this W-2 so that I can file my taxes or because I have to. It was, now it's an opportunity. Filing this W-2 is an opportunity to become the type of person who's on top of his finances and super organized, which is something he wanted to do. And what a new way to look at a to-do list, right? And all that took was just assigning a different meaning to it, right? One that served him, one that was realistic and an empowering meaning. And the reality is that things that are good for you are good for you, right? And so if you want to rewire these habits, just get realistic about what these things do. Eating healthily, it's just good for you, right? It's good for you. And so realistically, it's not very hard to come up with the meaning that's realistic of the situation. Same goes for taking care of your body. Same goes for reading. Same goes for meditating. Same goes for not being addicted to entertainment versus education, right? Just all these enriching habits. The reality is, if you look at it from a clear picture, they're good for you, right? And so, and they are acts of self-love and self-compassion and becoming, furthering you to where you want to go, right? That's one of the most energizing things I can think of. And so it really gets, just take some time to maybe reassign some new meanings to things. But anyways, back to my story. So that concussion period was a very transformative catalyst for me. And that was the period where I just went all in on becoming my best and obsessing over obviously optimizing my physical health, but also on a daily basis I was frustrated because I didn't feel good. I then had to turn inward a lot, and I started diving into spiritual books and spiritual principles. Presence, awareness, surrender was a massive one. About, I want to say, a year to a year and a half into my concussion, I really internalized surrender, and that completely transformed my life. But that period, I had to turn inwards to these spiritual texts, Michael Singer, Eckhart's Holy, and another transformative period of my life where I then started to learn how to cultivate an inner state that didn't depend as much on external circumstances. Long story short, that's a little bit of my background, and now fast forward to today, I have transformed my physique into one that I'm proud of. I've rewired a disempowering mindset, and just at a fundamental level, my self-talk is different, completely different. My filter on reality is different. It's still not where I want it to be, but it's far from where I was before. I installed habits that 100% changed the course of my life and who I am, and they're here to stay. You know, there's some sort of ease, there's a special feeling that comes with knowing that, and at this point I don't really think about it, but knowing that you're in control of what's in your control, right? And I can really only see it in contrast with people, but yeah, that's another thing. And I do the work, I created a job and a business, and I do the work that I feel is my genuine purpose on this earth, and that's my why. I now get to help other people, business owners, C-suite executives, professionals, and just the general world through my content, which is a massively enlivening thing to wake up to on a daily basis. And so I want to teach you everything I've learned from these past 3 years of my life, and hopefully, and you definitely will, get a lot of value. This is how I would think about habit change. I would think about installing a new personal operating system that automatically, to some extent, produces identity-aligned behavior. So the transformation, my idea behind how transformation happens is that your identity shapes your beliefs, which shapes your emotions, which shapes your actions. Then it's important to create systems that make those actions consistent and repeatable without relying on independent daily motivation. And once you are able to systematize those actions, that creates more evidence for this new identity that you want to reinforce, because your identity is built on evidence. And another fundamental law or paradox of behavior change is that your habits, James Clear talks about how your habits shape your identity. And that's true at a fundamental level, right? What you do is who you become. But what I think James Clear doesn't talk about is the fact that there's another piece, which is that your identity, if you want to change your habits for the long term, your identity, you kind of need to change your identity first, because your identity is what dictates your habits. Your beliefs shape your behaviors. And so it's hard to just change your habits and your behaviors if fundamentally as a person you're the same, you have the same identity, right? So that's the paradox, is that your habits change your identity, but your identity is what dictates your habits. And so there's two other levers that you can pull to change your identity. And this is your associations and your environment. Who you associate to largely shapes your personal story. We all know this. Just hear the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. It's very true. But the good news is that you can actually choose to associate with anyone you want with social media and books nowadays. Great thinkers, great authors, great leaders, whatever, right? You can just choose to associate with them by consuming their content on a daily basis or consuming their work on a daily basis instead of consuming what's on the TV, what's on the news, whatever, what's on TikTok, whatever. So your associations and then your environment, which refers to the inputs that are being fed to your inner ecosystem, to your mental factory. That's how I'm referring to environment in this case. And so beyond the habits, associations, environment, right? What is the quality of the consumption that you're putting in to your mind and your psyche? That is then what's gonna, at least in some level, churn out in terms of your identity, your thoughts, your inherent self-talk. And so that's another lever you can pull. Cool. But here's how I think about rewiring your identity from scratch as someone who, let's just say you're starting and you want to just totally change your identity, change your habits, and make massive shifts in the course of who you are in your life. So I would first start by conducting a current identity audit. And let me just go into here, because another fundamental law of behavior change, or just in general, is that awareness precedes change, and the people that are the least likely to change are the ones that have zero awareness. And so it's really important to first conduct a current identity audit. And what this means is, you just answer some questions about, the stories you tell yourself. What feels true about you that limits you, even if it limits you. I like the question, where do my behaviors contradict the person I say I want to be? And what behaviors do I repeat that don't serve me? These are just some guiding questions, but conduct a full identity audit of what you're at least aware of, but limiting beliefs, ways that you define yourself, and just start there, because that is going to show you what boundaries your brain currently enforces. And the final question, once you fill this out, is to just ask yourself, are these beliefs absolutely, undeniably true? And the answer is most likely no. You begin to solidify your identity based off behavioral evidence of what you've done in the past, right? And so all these answers are because you have some sort of evidence in the past that that's true, right? But it's all malleable. Who you are is malleable. And so you can start to, once you're aware, you can just start to intentionally change things, and then you'll have new evidence. So that's the start of how I'd go about it. And then, let's see, next, I would do a total habit analysis as well, in addition to the identity audit, basically going through from start to finish of, every single habit you do. So wake up, check phone, go on a walk, whatever. And all it'll do is allow you to see what you do on a daily basis. And a lot of times you're not aware, and when you're able to see it painted out in words, it's so much easier to change it because you see how ridiculous some things are. But anyways, one more thing is, after you list out all the habits that you do on a daily basis, put a plus sign next to it if the habit is helping you to become the type of person you want to become. An equal sign if it's neutral, or a negative sign, minus sign if it takes you further from the type of person that you want to become. And that'll give you a very nice scorecard analysis of where the direction you're moving in as it relates to progressing towards your personal goals. And don't observe without judgment. It's not the point. We're not judging, we're just noticing. Awareness precedes change. Cool. What I'd then do is, after we have that total awareness of our current identity, habits, beliefs, and behaviors, I would begin to construct the future identity that you want to build towards. And so a fundamental idea here is that the future self that you want to embody, that the question you want to ask yourself is, who is the type of person that naturally generates the outcomes I desire. Like I said earlier, the door to success swings inwards, right? And so don't think about what do I have to do to achieve what I want. Think about first, who is the type of person that naturally generates those outcomes. These are behavior traits, routines, habits, beliefs, right? That's what really separates someone who's successful in the pursuit that you want or someone who's unsuccessful in the pursuit that you want, because it's definitely not the goal, right? Everyone has the same goal, but there's winners and losers, or successful people and unsuccessful people. That's how James Clear talks about it. So it's definitely not the goal. It's largely the systems, but it's really largely the internal work, right? The habits, the identity, the beliefs. That's what separates people, because your beliefs shape your behaviors. Your behaviors obviously shape your reality. So anyways, I would begin to figure out that target identity with precision. And like I said, character traits, behavioral patterns, internal states rather than external achievements. The magic question is not what do I want to have, but who do I need to become? And then after that, what I'd do is I would write what's called a future self narrative. This is massively important, but you'll find that without painting a very clear picture of that future self that you want to embody, the way that you start your day, the way you end your day, the way that you show up in your relationships, the way that you move through your environment, your relationship with food, exercise, self-care, personal development, your habits, your internal state, right? Unless you paint that full picture of that identity and how that identity moves throughout the world, it's really hard to embody that because you actually don't know what you're shooting for. You just have a vague idea of, I want to kind of do this, but you're not going to be able to embody that. And so it's really important to paint it and make it exist in the mental plane first so that you can then step into it easier in the physical plane, right? So once it exists in the mental plane, you're one step closer to embodying it in the physical plane, or at least you've made that connector because you can see the gap, and then you can start to make progress towards it. And you can't just paint it in the mental plane and then think you're going to get there without changing your actions and actually how you show up. But it's really hard to show up without that clear shooting point. So I would write a future self narrative and write it in the I present tense from the point of view or perspective, whatever it's called, of I. So you're saying that you're writing it as if it's an autobiography, that it exists, and write it, maybe a year to 2 years, maybe a year in advance, so that it's not 10 years, but it's not a month, so it actually feels realistic. And instead of saying I will, or I have, or I want to, not I have, I will, or I want to, you say I X, you just do it, right? And so that's how you would write the future self narrative. Another cool thing I would turn to is something called a drive statement. So this is similar to, I would also do a meaning exercise. So taking a look at the habits or behaviors that you find hard to do, the good habits you find hard to do, and the bad habits that you find hard not to do. And I would do a meaning exercise. Basically list all them out and just say, genuinely, realistically, what is the meaning I assign to each of these things? Do I assign nutrition do I assign eating healthy rather as a painful experience where I feel like I have to exercise discipline, blah, 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 right? Or do I see eating healthy as an act of self-love, an act of moving myself closer, increasing my mental clarity, increasing my productivity, and just being the type of person I want to be, right? So do a meaning exercise and figure out what the meaning you assign to these things, and you'll see that that'll quickly change your behaviors. And change the meanings, and change the meanings behind how you see these good things you want to practice and these inhibiting things you want to stop practicing, and change the meanings first. Then you can perform a drive statement, which is basically map the pain, understand, this is kind of a one-time thing you do as it relates to motivation, but map the pain that you refuse to repeat, right? So you're obviously watching this video. If you're still watching this, you're obviously watching this video for a reason, and so that reason is change. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I couldn't help you change. So anyways, map the pain that you're tired of experiencing and get that clear. Why do you want to change? This is part of the process of choosing a compelling why. If the why is powerful, the how is easy. Shout out to Jim Rohn. And then you identify the desires that are powerful enough for you to sustain that effort. So what's the pain that you're just refusing to repeat? That's one why. What is the compelling price or compelling promise that you want to strive towards that is sustaining your efforts? That's another aspect. Yeah, those are really the two driving forces, pain and pleasure. So Tony Robbins talks a lot about this, but map the pain and then map the pleasure. And that'll help you understand why you're doing what you're doing. And then you can also define a few non-negotiable commitments where you're basically just telling yourself, this is kind of separate, but what are the standards that you just choose to live by from now on? And what are you unwilling to negotiate with yourself, right? Make a contract to yourself and say, make it sustainable. Don't say, oh, I'm unwilling to not do 5,000 push-ups every day, but make it sustainable, but make some contracts, make some commitments to yourself in this moment so that your future self will thank you. Cool. You can then turn that into a personal drive statement. Whenever you're having a challenging day or challenging decisions with these things, you can just reread this drive statement and it'll reinvigorate that why and instill it with some new power. Important note, after you write your future self narrative, print it out on a piece of paper and reread it slowly every single morning within 30 minutes of waking up, ideally as soon as you wake up, so that your brain is primed going into the day. And it'll then use its salience network and filter out what is relevant and what traits, what experiences correlate to that identity as you reread it in the morning and prime yourself for the rest of the day. Cool. And then weekly refinements you can make to the future self narrative is, on a weekly basis, start to add things, remove things that feel inauthentic, change things that you want to make more precise, and yeah, there's a balance. It's a working, living, breathing document. Once we were clear on that future self, I would then start to reverse engineer the habits based off that identity. It's pretty easy to extract habits that a certain person probably, most likely, reasonably does on a daily basis. So I would extract the habits that the version of you that you want to embody does on a daily basis, and I would think about the specific habits they practice, and then also think about inhibiting habits that you currently have in your life that type of person definitely does not do. Now you have two lists, and then you can start to make that change and start to track it. But anyways, have a tracking system as well. So I kind of have a simple one in Notion, but you can do this on a habit tracker as well. Check out my videos. I'll link it below on how to set up a manual or a physical analog journal habit tracking. That's my favorite way to do this. But you can also go ahead and habits tracked, habits completed, and then kind of have an alignment percentage of where that is with where you are, where that gap is between the tangible behaviors that you do and that the identity you want to practice does. Cool. Delete this. And then what I would do is next start to create habit shaping phases. Once we have our ideal habits, the ideal behaviors you want to shoot towards, it's really important to break them down into gradual phases. James Clear talks about doing this in 5 phases. So, if your end goal is strength train 3 times a week for 1 hour, very high intensity, right? You probably wouldn't start with that. You would start with strength train maybe 3 times a week for 5 minutes to dial in, rewire those pathways, and get your body primed that 3 times a week it is showing up to do strength training. But it's not going to be for an hour after just 0 to 100, right? And so you then create 5 phases. Next week, build a little bit layer on top of that. Next week, or it doesn't have to be a week, but next phase, and think of it in 5 phases. And so you choose the habit first, you get that full version. Then you shrink it to the minimum version. What is the minimum version that I would be content with doing? Make it so low friction that it would be unreasonable not to do. Then, this is just some more stuff. I'll go into more of it later. But there's ways you implement it into your day, and then you start to expand it layer by layer. And now we'll have a very set, methodical game plan of how we're going to get to our habit, but in a sustainable way, right? So a lot of people self-sabotage here. They go 0 to 100, and the system just breaks, not because they're incapable, but because they overloaded it. And behavior change follows the same laws as physical training, right? You need progressive overload. So very simple, but a thing that people overlook. And then I alluded to this earlier, but really important to do an identity environment audit, because your habits shape your identity, but it's really hard to change your habits for the long run without first changing your identity. So do an associations audit. You don't have to say ghost all your friends, but just you can start to associate with new authors, new thinkers, new leaders for a greater percentage of your day. So associations audit, figure out where you lie there, and then more importantly, an environment/consumption audit. Robin Sharma has a quote that I just love. He kind of talks about watching TV, video games, surfing the internet, being on Facebook, and gossiping. A lot of people live like that, genuinely. And that kind of lifestyle hypnotizes your brain to create a story of average. The A players operate in a fundamentally different way. They're reading books, taking courses, surrounded by other A players, doing work that matters, confronting their fears, and doing things that move the needle in their productivity and their personal lives. I love that. Cool. Going on. Phase 4 is where it starts to get fun, and this is once you have this relatively strong starting point, this is where the magic happens. You convert this new identity and these new habits into daily systems. So how I think about a system is, let me go over here actually. Yeah, let's just go here. So I think about a system as a structure or a process that produces a consistent result. It removes reliance on motivation, and it removes decision fatigue, important, and it allows a specific result to be repeated consistently, not randomly or on good days only. So I asked myself, when understanding how to systematize this, how might I systematize the entire process of personal transformation and consistency on the right actions? And I think of system as when we do X, Y happens automatically. Y is that behavior or result we want to exhibit that takes a lot of energy to produce independently every day. And X is the straightforward input or exercise we focus on to produce Y without thinking. Now, this doesn't mean that you build a system once, and personal growth and change happen forever automatically. A system still requires action and maintenance, but it's leveraged action, and it doesn't rely on independent daily motivation. I'll explain what I mean. Additionally, true personal systems, ones that run and operate in your life, that's unique to your life and your situation, that obviously has to be tailored to your life and yourself, and that's how you maximize. Creating a personal system is how you maximize your specific potential for success within your specific lifestyle, right? Everyone has different lives. It wouldn't be fair to say that everyone can do the exact same things, right? So that's how you maximize your potential in your lifestyle. But I've still broken down the universal system, which we're now seeing now, into 7 phases, within which there are many smaller parts. So, key rule, your daily routine is your most important system. Create a daily routine that removes decision fatigue, makes core habits easier to follow, and links behaviors together so that they begin happening more automatically. Design with your daily routine beats willpower. That's where transformation becomes mechanical, is in a very potent, very sustainable, very optimized daily routine. You're basically integrating a series of daily rituals that you're able to run on repeat without thinking much, inputs that create specific desired outputs. Obviously, with fitness, nutrition, and sleep, you want to have a predetermined game plan. You don't want to be shooting in the dark, especially with fitness if you have a specific fitness goal. So I'd recommend getting a game plan or a structured split. My personal approach is home workouts with minimal equipment. I use a kettlebell and a pull-up bar, but a lot of my workouts can easily be modified to just purely have nothing except body weight and maybe a kettlebell if you wanted. So my approach is optimized home workouts that actually build muscle, because I think it's just the lowest friction way. If you work out in your home with no equipment, you have zero excuses. And that's what I found to work for me. And also when I then go travel and I'm on the road and I don't have access to the same machines and equipments, I can get a workout in a hotel room or in a little space, no matter what. So it just removes total friction. That's why I love home workouts with minimal equipment. But have a game plan. I personally strength train 3 times a week, and then I do cardio, stretching, and walking on the other days. Realistically, you don't need to train more than 3 times a week for strength, and you just make sure that you're doing it in the right way, in an intentional way, and you're doing it with high intensity when you do train, but you're allowing yourself to recover in the off days. Same with nutrition. I follow a very straightforward diet, but I just have simple rules. I don't eat added sugars, definitely no liquid calories, and I don't consume fried foods. Those are my big 3s. And yeah, I eat a whole food, unprocessed diet. There's ways you can change. You can do an 80-20 and 90-10, but I just eat whole foods. I eat the same thing every day pretty much. Animal proteins, fruit, veggies, rice, and potatoes. And yeah, I just make rules for myself. I predetermine what's going to be sustainable in my life, and I just make a rule. That I don't make a restriction, I just make a removal rule. I eat this, I don't eat this, and everything else is on the table. Cool. Sleep as well. Sleep is massive. So shout out to Bennett Luke, but he changed my mindset on this. But a physical transformation should account for sleep, nutrition, and then fitness as it relates to fitness transformation. Sleep, nutrition, and fitness in that order, right? So you need to have high quality sleep because you can't recover, you can't function well, you can't make the right decisions without that. So 7 to 8 hours of sleep, what your body needs. And the way I think about getting good sleep, morning sunlight, morning light in your eyes is nature's caffeine, plus it just sets your circadian rhythm. So that is number 1, get morning light in your eyes. Number 2 is turn off overhead lights at least an hour or 2 before bed. So I just turn off my lights in my room, and then I use ambient lamps, and that's a game changer. Just lighting, changing the way that your body processes light is the number 1 thing that I've made for my sleep, because it naturally then your body naturally produces melatonin after that, and you don't need melatonin gummies, you don't need whatever, right? Your body is just tired because you've told it, you've given it the right inputs, but our current biology is kind of confused when we have constant light. We don't get sunlight in the morning. We have constant blue light throughout the day. We have constant blue light right when we're going to bed. And yeah, then of course you have no melatonin. You got to take a melatonin gummy. So light, number 1 thing. There's many other things you can do. I could just talk forever on fitness, nutrition, and sleep. So I'm going to, for the sake of keeping the video relatively succinct, I'm going to keep going on. But it's better if your body has fully digested food before going to sleep so that it can then focus on recovering and repairing other areas of your body, not digesting food. That's another massive one. Find protocols that work for you. Start small and build gradually. This is where it gets fun, your daily operating system. So, what is a daily operating system? It's pretty comprehensive, but I think of it primarily as a supercharged schedule. So, basically, tying the core habits, what are the non-negotiable things that I need to do in my day for me to advance myself towards my vision for the future. Habits, work, routines, events, obligations, errands, whatever it is, you have to have a reliable game plan going into each day so that you're not wasting all your energy deciding what to do, no decision fatigue, and that it's actually optimizing the right areas of your day so you're being more effective and productive. So you have the things, your non-negotiable things, and you have to arrange it in the correct way. So, way to think about this, identify the core habits, daily anchors you want to practice. For me, this is prime nutrition, morning meditation, daily workout, some sort of work block typically, and then a wind down routine before bed. And a daily anchor is something where, regardless of your schedule, you have these core anchors of these 80-20 habits that you want to practice every day, no matter what. For example, I walk after I wake up. I brush my teeth, and I walk after I wake up, no matter where I am. I can do that wherever I am to get the morning sunlight, right? A 5-minute walk around the block, that's it. I meditate after I walk. It's another anchor. That's a less core anchor, I would say. But I work out before I eat dinner. or I work out before a meal. So you could work out before breakfast, you could work out before lunch. I work out before dinner, and wherever I am, I just do that. So even if I'm traveling, whatever, I'm just hitting a quick workout before dinner. And then another daily anchor I have is I journal and I read before bed. I can do that wherever I am, whatever schedule I have. I can scale it back on busy days, but I journal and read before bed. These are examples of daily anchors. And you kind of ask yourself, okay, what part of your day doesn't change? For me, you wake up, if you're lucky, you wake up, you eat dinner, and you go to bed. These are things that happen every single day, and so I can then start to pick an 80-20 habit that I want to do on a daily basis no matter what, and I can say, okay, which habits naturally fit with these other things, so I anchor them. So walking after waking up, great anchor, because I get that morning light. Working out right before dinner, also great anchor, because then I'm eating protein or consuming protein right after I work out. And then bed, journal and read right before bed, great anchor, because it's the best way to unwind. You turn your devices off, you have time to just sit with yourself, pen, paper, more paper, and read wisdom and consume things. I talked about your consumption. Consume things that you want to reflect in your identity before going to bed and drifting off to bed and changing those brainwaves into slower brainwaves and a more malleable state. So it does fit perfectly. And those are some of the anchors that I do in my day every single day. Aside from making anchors, it's important to make an implementation action for each habit. This is from James Clear, but basically it massively increases the likelihood that you'll do it. It's very simple, but if you want to practice a new habit, in the first format of an implementation intention, right, I will perform whatever behavior at this time in this location. Make it specific, you're much more likely to do it, and put this into your calendar. So for me, I will meditate at 8:30 a.m. in my room, right, whatever. Format 2 is called habit stacking, where you then, similar to anchoring, it's basically the same thing as anchoring, but you say, after I do this existing habit that I already have that's already anchored in my day, I will do this new habit I want to practice. 2 versions for an implementation intention that's going to increase the likelihood of you following through, and also make sure that they're actually slotted at the right parts of your day, right? You want to make them slotted at a part that's actually going to be successful. Cool. And you can take habit stacking one step further and use them in dynamic situations. So it's no longer part of your daily routine. This is actually how you live your life, right? So, and this is basically saying, when I see or when this happens, I do this. So, for example, when I see stairs, I will take the stairs instead of the escalator. That's a great habit stack. When I want to eat candy, I will then eat frozen blueberries, right? So you're making decisions for you up front. And so what you do is you list your bad habits and then you create replacement rules. So when I want to snack out of stress, I will eat a prepared high protein snack, right? You're basically just setting yourself up for success. And these are things that are kind of rules. You can think of them as code within your personal operating system that are going to be tailored to your life and your unique situation. But you create these rules up front, basically. Cool. And one more thing you can leverage, these are all just different things that you start to stack, and then we weave it into a cohesive personal operating system. Add motivation rituals before difficult habits, specifically workouts. I think this is the best way to use them. So basically, before every workout, you can play your favorite song and take a 5-minute incline walk or a brisk walk to get warmed up. And that's kind of just the enter phase. So let's say you don't really feel like working out, whatever. You don't jump straight into the set. You play your favorite song, and then you go on a 5-minute quick brisk walk, right? And then that's the motivation ritual. You do that every single time before you then get into a nice workout. And then over time, after you just take care of this easy motivation ritual and this relatively pleasurable experience, then your body's already primed, your body and brain are already primed to then get ready and get after it in a workout. So you can use motivation rituals before hard habits Similar thing is, oh, I make this cup of tea and I clear my desk before I get into deep work. Whatever. You do that every single time so that your brain starts to enter a new state every single time. You want to enter a different state for a specific habit. Once we have these implementation intentions, these habit stacking rules, these daily anchors, and these motivation rituals, we have the baseline of what we want them, we then put them into our daily routine and our schedule, like I showed above here, and you just time block time, what's the activity, what's the duration, and then make sure that you have your intentions written out on a sheet of paper or typed in a doc, and every single thing in your day just makes sense, right? It fits together like a puzzle piece, and then you have rules, personal rules and codes inside of that which tell you and predetermine how you're going to behave given susceptible situations. Cool. And one more thing I like to include in my daily routine is just to have a flex block. You can, or you can just have an open space, but basically a period of time that's dedicated to errands or random things that come up, because obviously you can't have 24 hours go perfectly, right? So that baked into your daily routine is also helpful. But most importantly, you test and refine it every single week. So it takes a while to find a daily routine that works for you. And you test and refine it every single week. So you live it, you stress test it, and then you actually get real-time feedback, and then you make adjustments based off that. What habits felt good? What anchors worked? Where did friction show up? Huge. What needs to be simplified? And then we go ahead and you refine it. Cool. Another cool thing you can do is write a commitment contract to yourself. Just committing for these next 90 days, I will do the best that I can do. I will show up and do the best that I can do. That's all that's ever asked for of you, the best that you can do. And I will show up and do the best I can do for these next 90 days. Sign it. Cool. This is one of my favorite things, and this goes back to, when X, Y happens in terms of systems, is an end of day report. It's incredibly important to have something like this. So what I do is I have a habit tracker set up where I track the specific tangible habits that are tied to my identity. And then I also have a guiding question, which is basically, did I act in alignment with my future self narrative today? You track the habits, and then beyond the habits, you start to unpack the stacks of evidence for or against it. So in the intangible decisions, behaviors, and mindsets, you reflect on your day. Where did I act in alignment? That's a stack of evidence that you can now lean on, that you're now becoming that future self. Where didn't I act in alignment? This is where we don't judge, we notice, and then we make improvements. So was it an identity-based or a circumstance-based reason? Was it because there's a past pattern that arose that it felt uncomfortable, your identities were clashing? Or was it just purely circumstance-based, which is okay, like life happens, right? And what thoughts, beliefs, or emotions arose during that moment that maybe caused you to make a certain decision if it was identity-based? And just list them out so that you can see, okay, now I have my stack of evidence against my evidence, and now I'm aware of it. Awareness precedes change, and then you create an identity vote tally. So simple, votes for, votes against, and you can kind of see where the scales lie. And then you can just ask yourself one thing. I like to do, what's one thing I want to do differently tomorrow? It's that concept of 1% better. But if you can bring one thing you want to do tomorrow based off this really, really valuable insights and this valuable information on a daily basis, what's one thing I want to do differently tomorrow? Over a course of a year, you get 37 times better. And on the flip side, if you get 1% worse every year by just through neglect, right, of not doing certain practices, of not being intentional with your life, if you get 1% worse every year, you actually end up diminishing down to about 0. It's interesting. And this is kind of like that X I was talking about that leads to Y. So basically, all we are focused on is we have this end of day report system, and we just know that it's pretty easy to just do an end of day report every single day. But what this causes, what this leads to, is changes in our behavior, very massive changes in our behavior, insights, valuable information, course corrections, that why that we want those behaviors, those results, without us having to think about those behaviors and those results every single time. It's not us independently every day figuring out getting creative. It's we have this end of day report system. All we think about is taking care of our end of day report. Wow. all we think about is taking care of our end of day report and then why it automatically happens as a result of this process. Does that make sense? That's how I would think about a personal operating system. It can get very complex or as simple as you'd like. I like to keep it as simple as possible. So to sum it up, you're taking identity and habits, converting this into a system that removes decision fatigue, reliance on motivation, makes it very clear, makes it easy, links habits together, and now you start to operate. There's no ambiguity in your day. You start to operate, and then you can see where so you can see where the gaps in that funnel are. You can see, okay, this is the blueprint now. Now where was I inconsistent? Where was the friction? What didn't work well? Or then you start to change that in the system, and then you're able to address it and make pivots and make improvements so that maybe that doesn't show up next week. And you do this on a weekly basis, on a daily basis, you get pretty good at understanding your behaviors, your goals, how you're spending your time, and where you are in relation to progress. Phase 5, once we have that system, that 1.0 system in place, and it's constantly being refined, then I would start to install habits gradually. And you know how we made those 1 through 5 phases in the beginning? Start with phase 1. With, now we have our system, and then we link those habits. Those phase 1 habits are super easy to show up for, and we just dial in that consistency and that art of showing up first. They're non-negotiables. We're hitting 5-minute workouts, we're doing 1-minute meditations, whatever, right? We're just making it really easy, and we're wiring those neural pathways and getting that momentum going. All that matters is that a rule I like to use is never miss twice, but you just don't put up a 0, right? So count 5 push-ups instead of none, because this is what James Clear says: going to the gym for 5 minutes may not improve your performance, but it reaffirms your identity, and that matters more in the long run. So just don't put up a 0, and it can be super easy. You just kind of throw that idea of perfection out the window. And you just need to get your reps in. Gateway habits get mastered in this phase. Consistency becomes non-negotiable. And now we are starting to see the workings of a cohesive system, a cohesive routine, a cohesive life with a strong foundation. Phase 6, I like to then do environment architecture here. So now we're rolling, we understand how things are moving, we understand what levers, where the friction points are. We can then start to design our environment in the most intentional way with the most data. So I like to do a visual cues design, which basically humans are very visually stimulated, or visually, in terms of the sensory inputs, the visual sense dominates the human brain. So visual cues matter a lot when you're trying to pick up new habits or remove existing habits. So how I would think about visual cues design: step 1, choose the habits that you want to support, and then identify what actually prompts that behavior. What's that behavior starting point, right? And it's usually it can be usually some sort of visual cue, no matter what it is, even if it's as simple as a to-do list card. But once you have that visual starting point that prompts the cue, then you place that cue where you can't miss it, where you want to practice the habit, whatever, just in a very intentional way. And you can't miss it. So it makes the habit obvious when you're starting out. It makes it very obvious to remember that this is what you should do. You want to read before bed. Obviously don't have your book in the kitchen where you're going to bed and your book's in the kitchen. Obviously have your book right next to your bed or on your bed. That's an example. Place the visual cue where you can't miss it, and more importantly is to remove cues of habits you want to reduce. This is absolutely massive. You'll find that if you need to focus while working, if your phone is across the apartment, the house is not in the room, you don't have that visual cue. Well, first, you quite literally can't just turn and look at your phone, but you don't have the visual cue, and so you're just more likely to not get distracted on your phone because there's nothing cueing that. And the same is for junk food in your home. I would recommend making a rule to just not have anything that you don't want to eat kept in your home. You can go to the store, you can go get it when you're out, whatever, but nothing kept in your immediate living space. And that cue is just not there. Big one for me. I've been really obsessing over clearing out the noise I don't know who that'll make sense to, but in terms of getting things done and being clear and just progressing towards the goals that I want to, noise is massive. And so, for example, this is a rule or a new thing I've been doing that's been massively helpful. One task, one tab, no visual groups or bookmarks. So when I'm working on my computer, there are no tabs open except the one thing that I'm doing, and there are no bookmarks anywhere, whatever. It's just, I'm only focused on that, and it's been massive. So that's an example, because when you have all these things in your screen, emails, whatever, it's so much easier. You just have the visual cue, you're looking at your screen, and then you just get sidetracked. So that's that. And then, as always, you test and you iterate. You see how did those cues work in your environment, and then you change them based off feedback that you've received in your life. Cool. Now, even more important, arguably, is friction design. So friction in our environment really guides our behaviors through friction. So oftentimes discipline and motivation is overrated. Environment often matters more. I'll explain what I mean. But with friction design, you're basically, okay, this is the fundamental idea. We live in a modern, addictive world with a lot of technology, with ancient biology. Our biology is not meant for this. Our biology is meant to be in the middle of somewhere in nature without Uber Eats, Instagram. Uber Eats and Instagram is a big one, or just any food at our disposal, right? So our biology is not used to that, and so it's so hard for us to make the choices that are actually good for us and the ones that we're meant to make, because we're in a world where we have ancient biology in this modern addictive world. Does that make sense? So you have to manually input friction into your life. You have to manually remove friction and manually input friction, more importantly, to get back to a place where your biology is actually more in tune with the world around you. So we'll start by saying good habits, very easy to make easier. You think about the good habits you want to make easier. You identify the friction points. For example, working out. If your gym is 20 minutes away, you have to drive. That's a big friction point. I probably wouldn't even do that. So that's why I do home workouts, right? Think about what makes this habit harder than it should be, and then start to remove the friction. So you're making these predetermined plays in your life. You're pre-deciding your future behaviors by doing these things. So remove or reduce friction. Choose a gym that's close to you, or decide to do home workouts, right? Reduce the friction points. Whatever you can, remember, we're maximizing our potential for success. We're not making it inevitable, we're maximizing it. So wherever there's a friction point with a good behavior, that's just that much energy, an effort you have to overcome to get there. So what you want to do is lower that wall as much as possible. Cool. Same thing with bad habits, right? And even more so with bad habits. A great analogy is just eating diet nutrition, or a great example is just eating diet nutrition, eating junk food. So what makes that bad habit really easy to do is probably just having all the junk food, ice cream, candy, soda, whatever, in your immediate living space. You no longer have to go spear a buffalo and then make chips out of its, I don't even know if you can, whatever, right? You no longer have to do that. You just have a bag of Lay's within arm reach of your couch. So it's just, like I said, it's just our biology is not meant for that. And so identify what makes it easy. Typically with junk food, it's the fact that it's just so available to you, right? And at that point, what you want to do is the same goes with your phone and social media. Your phone is just right there, right? You no longer have to go walk and pay to go see something at the Coliseum to be entertained. You just have your phone, right? And so obviously we waste immense amounts of potential and energy just eating junk food and looking at our phones, right? That's an example. So we need to manually add friction to these bad habits. What we do is, ideally, you just don't keep any junk food in your home whatsoever. You can obviously go to the store and get it, right? But that's just enough friction to where when you're sitting working or you're watching or whatever you're doing, You no longer just have zero friction whatsoever between you and a decision that you don't want to make. You actually have to go input, get over a little wall. So that's what we want to do, right? Same with phone and social media. I love to use physical devices. So brick or phase. Phase is a new one that I'm trying out, but these are devices that you can then predetermine. You lock your phone or certain apps and you have a physical device, and you're basically predetermining your future behavior. So you lock the device and then you move it so that you physically can't just bypass the screen time blocker. You have to go get up or do something to actually get the physical tap, right? So that is an example of inputting more friction, and you're just trying to input as big of a wall as you can. And you know how big that wall is depends on how feasible it'll be, but you just don't want to make it zero friction to do a bad habit. You want to have to force yourself to jump over some sort of wall, and in that process you're likely going to be like, oh, what am I doing? It's just a habit that I don't want to practice, and then you don't do it. Cool. So that's environment design. There's a lot of things you can do here. Those are just two examples, but like always, you test it and then you refine it. Now, the last phase, once we have clarity on the future identity we're building towards, clarity on those habits, we understand the two other levers that affect our identity, which are going to help us make long-term changes for the habits. We've installed all these ideal behaviors and things we want to practice into a personal system that then starts to ritualize the actions on these different habits, and we've gradually started to build towards our initial gateway habits, I'll call them, and we're maintaining consistency, we're building, we're refining our system, we're understanding how we operate, not biting off more than we can chew. We've designed our environment so that they're now supporting our behaviors and making our behaviors easier to practice, not harder. The last step is solidifying these habits and really closing out the identity. And what you do is now we're at this point where we've gotten past, we're now at this point where we have a strong foundation. Most people don't have a strong foundation. So now we have a very strong foundation, and this takes time. James Clear, or the University College London, says it takes about 66 days of daily consistency for a habit to reach a point of automaticity, to the point where it's now easier to do the habit than not to do the habit. So that's why it's so important to have those habit installation phases in the beginning and lower the friction, because then you can start to stack the daily consistency, and now it's easier to remember and easier to do a habit than it is not to do a habit. But that wouldn't be possible if you started at 100. Anyways, now we're at a point where we have a strong foundation, and we then start to build and expand our habits to then be aligned with our tangible goals. So fitness goals, nutrition goals, personal development goals, business goals. Now that we have this foundation, the world is kind of your oyster, and you can start to expand it because you know that your consistency is dialed. So something James Clear talks about is the Goldilocks rule. So we can use the Goldilocks rule, which basically states that the human brain loves a slight challenge. It finds a challenge. If something is too easy, the brain gets bored. If it's too hard, there's too much resistance, the brain doesn't want to do it. It's just not pleasurable. So there's an ideal amount of challenge that scientists have found to be 4% beyond your current abilities. Obviously, you can't, that's not a realistic thing you can measure, but that's just the concept. It's a helpful compass to approach this phase with. So we then start to take a look at our habits and just keep slightly increasing that challenge, progressive overload, so that they're obviously being tied to a tangible result that we want to achieve. You know, you're not going to lose 20 pounds, you're not going to get shredded if you're doing 5-minute workouts. But that 5-minute workout phase was important because now that you have that skill set, that asset of consistency, the rest of it's easy, right? And so you're also not going to lose 20 pounds and get shredded if you do 500-minute workouts for 3 weeks and then you reset and you do it again, right? We've all been there. So we then start to tie those habits, increase those workouts intensities increase the intensities and the increasing the intensity and the rigor of the habits to actually be in line with the goals that we want to achieve. And we're doing that sustainably. And yeah, we're just building that. So I've been meditating for probably, like 8 years at this point, which is a long time. But I started meditating inconsistently at first. Then when I started to make it a practice, I started at like 5 minutes usually. Yeah, I started at 5 minutes, and then I would go to 10 minutes, I go to 15 minutes, and then I'd be like, 15 minutes too long, so then I'd put it back to 10 minutes, 5 minutes some days, right? So I just started super small, and over time it just stuck because that practice was satisfying, it was pleasurable. It wasn't an hour of sitting in silence, and it wasn't 1 minute to where I didn't get any benefits. So it was that perfect, just right Goldilocks stage. And so I would just keep doing that, and now fast forward, meditation is just ingrained in my life, and I reap the benefits of it. And yeah, I meditate for either between 20 to 30 minutes every single morning, and it's great. That's how these habits progress. And as you start to stack these habits, stay consistent, get new evidence, we now have new evidence for the person that we are. If the past 90 days you've shown up and done some form of workout, you've shown up with your nutrition, you've shown up with your intangible behaviors, right? You have fundamentally, you're a different person, right? Like, you are actually a different person because you've just done different things. And so as we stack these wins for the long run, and we have this really strong foundation, as we stack these wins, we're reflecting on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on the evidence, on where we're improving, on what we're doing, on how we're refining our system, our identity starts to get backed by evidence, right? There are different neural pathways that we're ingraining on a daily basis. And when you have enough repetitions, when you have enough votes for that new identity, that identity then gets solidified and becomes certain. So I'm at a point now where I am just fundamentally a very healthy person. I take care of my body. I eat clean foods. I don't negotiate with myself in any regard as it relates to fitness or nutrition. And I keep promises to myself. I am a meditator. I'm a lifelong learner. I love reading. I love growing as a person. I love personal development. I love helping other people. Whatever, right? The list goes on, but it's just because I have evidence and enough consistency and enough evidence, because I have enough evidence and enough consistency to back that identity. It's just who I am, what I do. So at that point, these habits are here to stay because it's who I am. And the same can be true for you once you have enough evidence. And that's really the magical point, is when you stop trying to be consistent. You no longer are exerting effort. It just becomes who you are, right? And at that point, it's so much harder not to do the habits that serve you than to do them. I'm at a point where I will go out of my way to relatively extreme measures to eat healthy foods. If I'm in a desert, in an oasis of unhealthy foods, I'm either not eating or I'm finding the one place that has a healthy item, right? So that's the point I'm at. And whether that's where you want to be at doesn't matter, right? It depends. It really depends on what your relationship is with food, nutrition, whatever, what your relationship is with yourself and how you want to do things. To me, one person can see that as being depressing and restrictive and self-sabotaging, right? To me, I just see it as, I could if I wanted to, right? I wouldn't feel bad because it was just circumstance based, but I just see it as me upholding a standard for nutrition that I have and enjoying that, right? I just don't see it in that way. So it depends what your relationship is with yourself and these habits, of course, but you get the point. At that point, if you've made it to the end of this video, you've stuck with me, and you then take these learnings and put it into your life, at this point, your life has fundamentally changed. The course of your life and who you are has changed for good. It is like the airplane that shifts a couple degrees to the right, and over the course of a few months, a few years, the two destinations of those airports, as if it kept its same course, and if it went a couple degrees to the right, completely different, right? And that's what's happened here if you take what I'm telling you. And it's really just the tip of the iceberg. Even after all that, after you do all that work, it's the tip of the iceberg, because time is now your friend, not your enemy. So these things compound, okay? And who you become in the process, you now have this repeatable framework for just rinsing and repeating. And who you become in the process is really the fruit. It's not the results you get, it's not the habits you practice, it's who you become. And so I say that this is just the tip of the iceberg because it really is. It's what you get from doing all these things on the surface is great, but that's on the surface. And once you get to the end of this whole process, you remember that there really is no end. You're always refining, you're always making improvements, you're always making tweaks and getting closer to that version, right? And there probably will come a day where you say, great, I'm here. And it's funny because in that process of knowing that your systems are in place, you're already there. You're just waiting for reality to catch up. But it's a never-ending cycle. There's never a point where you say, I am the best version of myself. There's always something to do. There's always something to improve. There's always a way to ascend in yourself. And it's a wonderful process. It's a beautiful process. You refine, and it's no longer about the outcome. It's no longer about, I'm getting here. It's about just the process. It's about the process of constant direction, of movement, of where you're going, the things you're doing, and the person you're becoming. I work one-on-one with a few clients who want to take this to the next level and want these personal systems built out for them, so that I kind of take care of the heavy lifting and they don't have to do that for themselves. Typically busy professionals, high-performing executives. If that's you and this video was valuable, you want to take it to the next level, you can DM me Holistic on Instagram at TrevorGetsHolistic, and I'll personally reach out with more details on how we can get in contact about working together. But if that's not you, then I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you consuming content, and I hope that through my content I'm able to help you make massive changes in the courses of your life and become someone who is more aligned with internally, more aligned with what's really in there, because I've been there where you know what you want, you know what it is, but your daily reactions don't reflect it. There's a mismatch. You're not aligned, right? Either because of the stories you've been told or the decisions you've made, whatever it is. But my goal is to help you become more aligned and become that person. So let's do it together. I'm not a guru. I'm not a life coach. I think of myself as a habit architect, a personal systems builder, and a lifelong learner. I'm on my own journey. I'm trying to become the best person I can be. And I'm in a pursuit of what I would call a truly wealthy life. So this doesn't just include money. This doesn't just include freedom. It's relationships, passion, purpose, craft, adventure, service, community, inner peace, whatever. It's a holistic approach. So let's do it.